Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Melissa Dawn. First, check out Brainsupreme if you are looking for the highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey. Check out Brainsupreme. Visit their website by using the link right in the description, and you're going to get 15% off your entire order. Also, watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. We're booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Finally, be sure to check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. This is also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite content creators there. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Melissa Dawn. She has studied history, art, folklore, and culture most of her life as a passionate hobby. Academically, she studied World Wars I, II, Russian history, and Western civilization in university, and has her degree in graphic design. She began podcasting in 2017 on several shows, including The Secret Door, Deep Program Podcast, and she now produces Gen X News to discuss the almost biblical revelations she is seeing in society. Melissa, welcome back. How you doing?
I am doing good. I am a little tired. I apologize to everybody. Didn't sleep much last night, so I'm going to do the best I can.
Well, we appreciate you being here to do this, and I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. Always love our conversations, and today we're going to get into some of the research you've done into Jim Jones and the People's Temple cult, which it's been only in recent years that I've become more interested in these
Mhm.
crazy charismatic cult leaders, mainly because it's really difficult to avoid cults these days and cult-like activities in our modern age. Of course, certain religions, but now politics, the medical system, education system, most of our institutions, at the least, have cult-like aspects. But like I said earlier, I'll be learning about this today myself. I only really know the basic surface information surrounding this event, maybe
Mhm.
less, so I'm looking forward to learning more today. Before we get into this, remind the audience a little bit about yourself and where they can find all your content.
Well, I mean, my podcasting kind of career started by fluke because I was writing on paranormal stuff. And I helped behind the scenes of a podcast called Folklore Podcast. And then eventually I went into my own. And my first podcast was like really dreadful. Like quality, I learned so much. And I just kept doing it. And then when I moved to America, I was trying to get into the paranormal stuff again. But I decided, it's more lively if I can do daily events and political stuff, and cults kind of fall into that, and MKUltra and
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
like that. So that's what I'm doing now. And of course, if you guys ever want to watch live streams, I usually do them on X, Rumble, and I was doing TikTok, but they gave me a 7-day ban. So X, Rumble, and YouTube. And simply all the links to anything you need to know about me is on the website. It's genxonx.com. So the live stream links are there, and also the audio podcast links are there. And, and it will keep developing. So talk about some strange politics and conspiracy theory, maybe even some more spiritual stuff, but and definitely cults. And anything can become a cult. That's what's really bizarre and strange. Anything can become a cult. I mean, and not all cults are like evil. Some of them are really benign, and the best of the cults can become culture, unfortunately. But the really bad cults, obviously, what we're going to talk about today is what people are really familiar with, is these really malignant, evil, psychopathic cults.
Right. And as we're coming to learn in our modern age about many of our historical events, there's usually much more to it than presented in our history books and on the surface. And oftentimes, with these more malevolent, powerful people that grasp the attention of the public, there are often CIA handprints in this, and like you said, MKUltra aspects. So we'll get into that as well. Very interesting stuff behind all of it. So where did you start when looking into Jim Jones? Maybe we could give everybody a little overview of the story.
Well, of course, I was doing shows on cults, and Jim Jones is one of the infamous, I should say, cult leaders. And of course, whenever I start looking at a figure, you're going to have to go back to the roots and, where were they born? What was their childhood like? What kind of person were they like as a child? And of course, when you go back to Jim Jones, early you see like an alcoholic father. His mother was Cherokee Indian. They were very impoverished. His mother was also the sole provider of their family, and he was very neglected, left on his own. He was, was born in 1931, before World War II. So he would have been a young boy during the war. And he grew up, he was actually a very enigmatic kid, like had that preacher personality very early on. He had
That's
signs
so
of,
weird.
yeah, he had signs of psychopathy really early on. And it's probably because of the neglect and
Right.
whatever. And there could be some genetic stuff. I mean, we don't really know. So just like when I came on here and talked about Ted Bundy, there was things in Ted Bundy's childhood that said, well, there's something that's wrong here. And Ted Bundy was born a little later, but he had this troubled childhood, single mother. And the same happens with Jim Jones. That doesn't mean everybody who has a single mother is going to be a psychopath. That's not what I'm saying. It's just in this instance, he seemed to have all the elements that just added up to that kind of personality, where he was a very hypnotic speaker. He would perform funerals for pets and preach.
That's crazy. And
Possibly,
he may have actually killed the pets that he performed the funerals for,
yeah,
right?
he may have. I don't know how true that is, or it's
Yeah.
just myth, but it's stated. And we know that people who have a psychopathic nature will often, children like that, when they're young, will experiment on little pets or lizards or birds or something, stuff like that. And
Wow.
very early on, I mean, when you go see who Jim Jones' eventual target is,
Mm.
when he becomes a cult leader, it's there early on. He was preaching to minority Black communities, people who would have been
Mm.
affected by, some pretty atrocious laws. And so he would preach to them, and he said he identified with their plights, because
Mm.
he was impoverished. So he had them, these early on stuff, these things that we're going to notice later on, when he's like this full blown preacher with a lot of power. They're there when he's a little boy.
Now, notice oftentimes with some of these characters that they may have intelligence in their family lineage or some sort of military background in their family lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Was this true for Jim at all?
And not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
He got into communism pretty like in the 50s, 1951. He's young. He's like 20 years old, and he was attending regular communist meetings. I don't, like I said, his father was an alcoholic. I'm not sure that his father, it wouldn't surprise me, and that's something I should actually have a look at.
Mm.
But his Jim Jones, I'll actually
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise
because
me either if there's something in that family history.
yeah, um, that I did not find anything about that.
Mm.
But let me see. I'm a Okay, so this is interesting. It says the reason his father was an alcoholic, he was in World War One, so he was
Mm.
a veteran, and
Veteran, there you go.
he
There it is.
probably had severe PTSD, breathing problems that he sustained from chemical weapons attacks. So there it is.
Right.
Um,
And
there it is.
along those lines with some of these stories that even if it seems something as innocent as the father was in World War II, just a military veteran, there may be
Mhm.
other ties to this individual that have more powerful links and more malevolent intentions behind what the relationship with the family is, things along those lines, but just something to look into. Very interesting, though.
Yeah, another thing to note, when he was young, he used to listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches. Take it or leave it.
Oh,
Take it or leave it. And one of the things that nobody talks about is like his father had chemical weapons used on him, right? That's why he was disabled and an alcoholic.
uh,
We don't know what those chemicals effects they have on the genetics, and then you go and have a
right,
child. We don't know. We have no idea if it's like epigenetics. We have no idea if that would pass on to your child and cause some kind of functioning problem. We don't
right.
know,
So
right? So
interesting.
like we have no clue how chemicals in your body affects future generations, because you pass it on through your eggs or sperm, whatever it is, right? We
Yeah,
don't know.
right. Man, that's so crazy.
Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, those wars were pretty brutal. And like I said, Jim Jones was a preacher kid, very enigmatic personality from the beginning, and then he gets into communism. And I think he was attracted to communism because he lived through like a Jim Crow period, and he in his mind he's seen injustices, and he thought communism was the solution to that.
Hmm.
He does start as a pastor in the 50s, and he had his own. He was at a Somerset Southside Methodist church, so he was later. He starts small, and then he claims that he leaves these churches because they were forbade integration with minorities. But I often wonder if he left those churches because he was inappropriate and they called him out.
Mm,
Because oftentimes psychopaths will say, "Oh my God, I'm a victim. I left because this is a horrible place," but they cause problems in groups, and they don't take instruction well, and they want to control certain groups. So if they can't, they'll leave and they'll make up that group is bad. It's like a weird projection. So I often wonder. He also, interestingly enough, he started off after he left this church. He would go door to door selling monkeys.
now this
He
is
raised
something,
monkeys,
man.
and
Anybody
that's
to me that
yeah.
raises monkeys is a red flag, and I probably wouldn't hang out with them, but that's just
Well,
me.
flying monkeys. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, well, that's
Right.
how he got in to raise funds. He would go door to door selling monkeys, and with his charm and wit, just, I don't know, get people
Jeez.
interested in what he was doing and what he was about. And like I said, he studied Hitler. He also studied this guy called Father Divine. I mean, you can look him up. Seems to be a really
Sounds like a cult leader.
strange figure. Yeah. Father Divine would instruct on how to manipulate members and make them
Oh yeah.
subservient. So he learned a lot of that from, I wouldn't even say Hitler. I'd say he learned a lot from Father Divine.
Mm.
A lot.
So
Um,
crazy.
Especially Father Divine instructed about finding or creating the enemy within your group to control people. It's an interesting concept that you will
Yeah.
see. And so then we got to say, was Father Divine hooked in with the CIA or FBI? Where was he learning these tactics?
Right.
Because I'm
It's
sure
so
these
crazy
these
that
intelligence agencies did that, like create an enemy within.
right. Because why would someone so young be so obsessed with manipulation and gaining control over people's minds and things like that? That's
Yeah.
just seems like something you learn from somewhere.
It's definitely, but like I said, I think the basis of his personality is, I don't know if he went through violence with his father. I'm assuming there could have been some in the
Hmm.
1930s. His father had PTSD, probably from the war, alcoholism. It wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
But, and that alone can make you become a
All right.
more sociopathic
I mean, from what I
individual. And
understand, trauma is like the main trigger for these MKUltra people.
yeah, trauma is mind control.
Hmm.
Trauma opens the ability to reshape the personality in the brain and the thinking process to control how you think.
Right.
That's why they do all this stuff to us on the TVs, and they show us all these, psyops or October 7th or 9/11. That's why they keep repeating it on the TV to traumatize us. So then they can put out their official narrative and what they want to go and do next. So we go along with it.
Hmm.
It's what it's all about. And
Right on.
I'm sure Jim Jones is practicing that. But first, you got to create an enemy. And that's what all great intelligence agencies do.
Right.
They create an enemy, and they tell you, look, at there's an enemy, but they were funding the enemy all along. And I mean, we can point to that in our history. If CIA, Mossad, whatever intelligence, probably the KGB does it. You could probably point to that left, right, and center how they do that. And Jim Jones is,
Hmm.
yeah, he's saying Father Divine he learned it from, but I have a feeling that these agencies are into all sorts of things: university, religion,
Yeah.
activism. They stick their paws everywhere.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he starts to create his own church. That's how he does it. He also created the concept of the rainbow family. Back in 1954, he started adopting children with different racial backgrounds.
Hmm.
He's building his persona that he wants to be known as. That's psychopaths, narcissists. They have this
Yeah.
real hideous thing beneath them, the shadow they hide, and they build their persona. So he's like, I'm the rainbow family. I'm this really great person. I help adopted children. That doesn't mean that all people who adopt children are horrible people creating a false persona. This is just about Jim Jones specifically. And then he's doing conventions, road trips.
Hmm.
He starts his own church, and he is, by the way, this is still in Indiana. He's from Crete, Indiana. I forgot to say that. And so he's doing this in that area in Indiana, creating his own kind of Methodist Baptist church. And initially, he's preaching, gospel about Jesus,
Hmm.
but that starts to change.
Mm.
And I don't have this in my notes here, but I think what starts to happen with him as he gets more control and he creates his own church in Crete is he starts to use these lessons from like Father Divine to create the enemy within. He starts to the church, I think at one point they find it with swastikas all over it. And he starts telling his members, well, look, we're not safe here. There's all these racists in Indiana. We've got to leave. We're going to go to California. That's where things are happening. And we got to leave because we're threatened. We've got this enemy. There's all these hillbilly hicks.
Hmm.
And none of it, people like will say that. But I personally think he painted the swastikas himself because we know
Hmm.
he's doing this create the enemy within. He wants to control his members. He wants them, he needs their energy to keep fueling. He knows he needs member, he knows he needs body counts, he needs their energy to fuel and keep his church going. Most of his members, like 70 to 80%, were always Black Americans, who, by
Hmm.
the way, a lot of them had their own businesses, their own money, their own pensions. They were independent, and they give that all right up to him. But he convinces them that they've got this horrible thing and they're not safe, and it'll be safer in glorious old California to move over to San Francisco and start the People's Temple. And that's what starts happening, I believe. And and here's the interesting thing: early on, even in the 60s, him and his family were going down to Brazil and South America. and testing his message down there. And he was always scouting out locations in South America, even further away. So he isolates his members from their family, brings them to California, and he's always looking in South America, which is interesting.
Hmm.
That this wasn't just a last minute thing. This guy is looking all the time. Yeah, he's looking all the time about how to get people more isolated from Western society, a modern
Mm.
society, taking over their pensions, making them. This is Cult 101. It
Right.
starts off nice. And, yeah, this is Cult 101, where he's getting them to give them the pensions. I mean, a lot of these people were not stupid. Everyone thinks cult followers are stupid, and that's just not true. Most of them are just empty, and they're maybe at a place in their life and they want something more. They feel like they need something spiritual or something to be given to them by somebody else. They don't feel like they can attain it. And there's someone like Jim Jones saying, I have, he has this enigmatic personality. He's a leadership position. He's preaching. It seems to have the simple answer for all of your problems.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is, and you get tied up, you get trauma bonded, emotionally attached. And next thing you know, he's controlling all your money, but he did offer to take care of them. He's like, if you give me all this stuff, we'll give you dental, we'll give you this. He's promising to act like the government, like a
Right.
communist, right?
Yeah.
He's using that communist stuff. So he's getting them to give up their independence. And this is why no one should ever want the government or anyone to have too much power over their finances.
100%.
Huge, huge stuff. So, and he
Right on.
originally, like I said, he goes by the Bible, he preaches Jesus, and he sticks with that. But it starts switching once they get to San Francisco. And San Francisco, ironically, I believe at the time, I don't know if it still is, but it was a headquarters for the CIA. They were operating there
Mm.
in San Francisco. So I find it interesting. Yes, it was the hub. I understand it had Haight-Ashbury. I understand that it was a lot of people were heading to San Francisco, but it's just so interesting that the CIA
Yeah.
was operating there.
Right.
Very interesting.
That
And
whole
they take a
area
great
was like
story.
a hub of culture creation and mind control, especially for the entertainment industry.
Oh yeah. And I mean, there was a whole bunch of other type of gurus there that weren't so much as culty and controlling people. Like what was the and there was tons of activists there. There was like Harvey Milk. He was gay right activist. There was Alan Watts. He
Yeah.
had been a former Christian. He was now a Buddhist. He had an enigmatic character who would preach Buddhism and instruct spirituality that way, but he's an alcoholic too. That it's so fun. All these people going, I have your answer here. Just a minute. I gotta have a bottle of wine, right?
Right,
It's
right,
really
right.
crazy. But he starts to switch. He actually switches and starts trashing Christianity. He starts
Mhm.
trashing Jesus and figures like that and telling them he's the reincarnation of that.
Yeah.
That's the false
There it
prophet. He
is.
tells you, I'm Jesus, I'm God. You have to worship. Huge red flag. But by the time he does that, you're so invested. You don't want to. Nobody wants to admit, well, I think I just got duped. I
Right.
think I'm an idiot. Um, they just keep going because they're like, oh, okay, well, he's taking care of me thus far. It's interesting. And then of course, Jim Jones doesn't just stick to being a preacher at this point. He starts getting involved in politics, local politics, for on behalf of the Democrats, in trade for money, power, and positions.
Mm-hmm.
So you start his mask slowly starts to slip, and you see that all of his rainbow family and equal rights, and I want Black Americans to have equal rights is not about that. That was an act. It's all about more power, more connections for Jim Jones. And I've got to wonder, like, I don't know if Jim Jones was just, this figure who had connections, like people just really liked him, or was the CIA giving him connections? Like, how was he getting it? He's got a list of really famous
Right.
people,
Yeah.
famous politicians that
That
he's
doesn't
linked
just
up
happen.
to. Exactly.
Yeah.
like Willie Brown, you know, um, like some really names that we would know today. That he's Jane Fonda, God,
Right,
Diane
yeah.
Feinstein.
He had a few celebrities praising him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll get into Jimmy Carter.
Hmm.
I mean, he's in with some big people, and you don't just get that way. And I think if he had any kind of enigmatic personality and they saw anything, we don't know. I can't trace like he was actually in MKUltra. I should actually look up if he actually served any time in any universities or was
Yeah,
any training thing. But he could have been, and they could have saw potential in his personality to control and manipulate people.
right.
I mean, you go watch a video of Jim Jones and you'll see exactly how alluring and enigmatic. You can understand how people were taken by him, especially at the time where people didn't know anything about cults.
Right.
And TV was rather new. TV was totally different. You had limited TV, and the news media wouldn't have reported on it anyways because they'll just tell they'll tell you what they want you to know, not the scary real stuff that's going on.
Right.
But I can understand how people were persuaded by him and in awe of him. And it still happens today with public figures. People celebrity worship all the time.
Yep. Unfortunate, but that's starting to slowly change as some of the
Yeah.
dark information starts to come out about how these businesses are fundamentally run, the people behind it, and what their intentions are. So, some very interesting things happening there too.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jim Jones still at this point, so he always makes sure that people see him doing humanitarian work. And that's important to narcissists and psychopaths is
Yes.
to be seen in their promotional as this really good community leader, self-sacrificing, you know.
Hmm.
But underneath it all, it's all the members doing all the work. And this is another attribute of the cult is he was like they these people, what he said was going to be care for them now is abuse. They're working around the clock. One of the things they do to control them now is they take away the food. They're malnourished, they're overworked, they're exhausted, and they're doing all the work. And he's just, enjoying the fruits of their labor and looking good on their shoulders. And so that really starts to happen here. And they say that like politicians, they're just as corrupt as anything. A lot of them don't care about people, they care about winning and power. And even they can even run and make money without winning,
Hmm.
so they start to really see him as a very valuable asset in terms of shifting election results.
Hmm.
One of the things that Jones starts doing for excuse me, politicians at this point is he takes all of he would say he had 20,000 followers, but it's probably more like 3 or 4,000. Narcissists always exaggerate, they always lie. But he starts taking bus loads of his followers and sending them to all these events to create this hype and this energy. So it looks like all these people are all over the place with these politicians, but it's the same people. I wonder who's still doing what party's still doing that. I mean, the Democrats today do that. Maybe the Republicans do, but it's a really Democrat technique, and they got
Right.
it from Jim Jones. And Jim Jones would bus his people all
Yeah.
over, and he would always leave empty seats on his bus so they could pick up some more members as
Right.
they were on this. So they create this hype. Everyone's like, "This is so cool! This is so amazing!" And they're like, "Hey, we got room on our bus for more." And so he's literally one of the biggest frauds that he did, voter fraud, was on behalf of Mayor Moscone. I get this right. It was alleged they couldn't prove it, but people were pretty convinced that he had all of his people come out to vote from out of town
Hmm.
using false identities.
Hmm.
He had people vote using dead people's identities. And Moscone won 12-1 as a mayor in San Francisco in 1975. That is just literally impossible numbers. It just doesn't happen. A 12-1 win is like, it just crazy that, and that's why people question the election results. And so I think Jim Jones was up to no good. And, they were using a lot of sneaky ways to win,
Right.
including having people vote that were not from that area. Um, because of that, Jim Jones received a permission as chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission after the win. So that was the payoff. He got positions that made him money, probably hardly showed up to do anything, but it's when you're a narcissist, it's not about, learning or doing the job properly. It's about having the position, the money, the power, and the perception of the false identity.
Mhm.
So then, of course, after that, it's on to bigger and better things. Jimmy Carter shows up in the picture, and Jones meets with Jimmy Carter on a tarmac in San Francisco airport. He was introduced to Jimmy through his wife, Rosalind, because their campaign was lackluster, to put it best. So she thought, oh, well, look at this great guy. He could help us. And so I don't know if he's the reason that Jimmy Carter won, but I think he certainly helped.
Mm.
And because he's at his peak in these years. We're a few years away from Jonestown, and
Yeah.
he's at his peak. People just, loved him, but he's probably actually onto a lot more drugs at this point and using. That's why he had those glasses. You always see him with the glasses,
Yep.
the dark glasses. He's covering up because he's drug using. So this is the political stuff, and I'm telling you, he's Angela Davis. People were comparing him to Albert Einstein
Oh,
and
wow.
like all sorts of people. They were trying, like, this is like, it's crazy stuff. And he was also promoted by Pulitzer Prize winner Herb Cain. He yeah, it's just insane stuff. So that's how he gets in politically in positions. But and of course, all along, Jim's just abusing his members and using them for his own purposes. Like I said, he's got 75% Black members, about 25% were white Americans, and they had all sorts of economic backgrounds. And he is, there's a way that he's doing it. Like I said, he's preaching love, equality, acceptance, inclusivity, and woe to capitalism, the same stuff you hear today. People think that all the stuff we're experiencing today with Marxism, or these people who want to abolish the hierarchy and replace it with some sort of chaotic utopia, is new. It's not. They were trying it in the 70s. This was there and it didn't stick. It was too extreme, and I think it was working better today because it's less extreme, because we've ever inched towards being accepting of a lot of this stuff. Like I told you, a lot of the Black people, they were poor. A lot of these people were business people.
Mm.
A lot of Black America before, even in the 40s and 50s, they were self-reliant. They had businesses. They made money. They had families. They were independent. And Jim Jones preyed on them because of all this racial inequality. And he preyed on them for the like the civil rights stuff. He presented himself as a savior for them.
Right.
And they didn't need a savior. They were already functioning on their own.
And he eventually started using illusions, stagecraft, theatrics,
Oh,
anything
yeah.
to pass himself off as a healer and having these quote unquote powers and abilities, and up to the extent of actually drugging people, things like that, right?
Yeah. Well, in one case, because if you're going to be that good, you have to make it look like you can do things that no mere mortal can do.
Yeah.
And one of the things they do is like healings, right? They'll heal people, place their hand upon people, or crazy stuff like that. And one of the things that he did, he would have fake people, actors, pretend they're blind and then they could see. He would pretend cutting cancer out of people, but it's just rotten chicken that they had hidden somewhere. One of the things they did about the drugging, they drugged a woman, and while she was out of it, they put a cast on her. And then when she came to, they told her when she had fallen, she broke her leg,
Huh.
and that they had put a cast on her while she was unconscious. And she was, that's
Wow.
what they're telling her. And she's a member. So in front of all his ministry, all his followers, he does this big healing ritual. And he says, we're going to cut the cast off and then you're going to walk. And so they cut it off and she starts running and everyone's screaming, going, my God, he just fixed her broken leg, the broken leg that she never had.
Yeah.
because they literally drugged this woman and then made her believe she had a broken leg that she never had. It was all lies, theatrical, and manipulation tactics and drugging people. It's really insane, just absolute crazy stuff. So he would, yeah, do this stuff to manipulate the followers to believe, because you can say you're the son of God, or you can say you're Jesus, you can say all this stuff, but eventually you got to show it. And this is what he did basically. Worse, that like kind of like some of these stage acts, magic acts, or illusionists that you see, he did a kind of crappier version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't be a good cult leader without being a sexual deviant. And of course, this always creeps in with these people, forcing his cult members into some sort of sexual
Mm-hmm.
activities or confusion or
Yeah,
mind control, things of that nature, right?
it's all the same stuff that you see today. He, on his small scale, he's confusing people about their sexual identity. He's splitting wives and husbands up so that he's the only one who has sexual access to women. He's also convincing men now that they're homosexuals and to have sex with him.
Jesus.
He was doing all sorts of depraved stuff. He is stepping up anyone who dares speak out. The abuse gets really intense, and because he has everyone brainwashed, the other anyone who speaks up gets attacked by the other cult members and beaten,
Mm.
violently. He has children being abused and paddled. He even had children, if they were misbehaving, to electric shock them or stand on a ledge for hours. He's manipulating parents, and parents are allowing him, abandoning their own instincts to protect their children and allowing him to abuse their children like this. And people are like, how can this happen? And it's like, well, they don't do it overnight. It's done slowly over a long period of time. And you're so invested and attached to this group that you can understand this is how, people in abusive marriages, this is why it happens, because they don't know how to get out, and their mind's so weakened and rearranged, they probably can't, and they're worked to death and they're malnourished to that. Like I said, they probably can't even think to get out, and they're too terrified to stand up. It's a really sad situation that you could put your children into this situation with religion. But that's the stuff he did. Like I said, he's confusing them about sexual identity, and he's having sex with all the women, and he's even, convincing the men that they're gay. But he's not gay, of course. He's perfectly fine. They're gay, and he's having sex with them. Like, it doesn't, none of it makes sense.
Right.
But when you're starving and you're abused and you're manipulated and you've been preached to for hours and hours on end, like I imagine his sermons are really long.
Right.
So it just beats your mind down. You're not thinking
Mm.
normal. And if you're not, and you isolated yourself from everyone and moved away and you're not around normal people, you don't have any other voices telling you, hey, this is a little bit crazy,
Right.
a little bit nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't take much after being exposed to that for a very long time for someone to mentally crack, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. No, and you're literally become a shell of a human
Mm.
with no ability to think on your own. And, one of the ways that Jim Jones is going to make sure that he's got the weakest of the weak, he's going to do tests all along the way. He did these things called white knights. And this is like a precursor. This is like foreshadowing what he's already planning and what's going to happen. And a white knight, basically, he would have members, all the members, he would make these bowls of punches, and he would have members drink the punch, and then he would say, oh, it has poison in it. And they'd all start freaking out, right?
Huh.
And he'd be like, oh, just kidding. Just kidding. I'm just messing with you. It doesn't have poison. I was just.
Wow.
What that does is, it's such an extreme thing. The people who are
Desensitizes
not
them.
totally going to conform to him will protest then. So he sorts them out, gets rid of
Yeah.
them. So he knows he only has the weakest of the weak. So he's clearly planning all along to
Right.
get them out of America. Clearly, he's got this on his roster, and he wants the most subservient. So these tests, these white knights, were ways of testing who were totally devoted and who would say, this is batshit crazy. Like
Right.
he put it so extreme. And you think, well, why would he do that? People are going to start noticing it. That's the point,
Hmm.
is to separate the who's going to cause an issue for him for
Right.
ultimate control.
Yeah.
And you can even see this. I'm seeing this in politics today with different parties where
Oh
they
yeah.
will test and politicians will do the craziest things and throw out memes or whatever and see who responds and who goes with it and who says, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
Happens all the time on different scales, but this is going to be a very abusive scale because everybody is pretty much in really close proximity. The closer proximity you are to the cult leader, the more likely you are to get abused.
As I said in my intro, it's unfortunately, what cult do you want to be a part of? How abusive is the cult that you're looking to
Yeah.
join? Will it harm you, or is it going to be somewhat okay, just a little minute mental manipulation? Because, like I said earlier, almost everything we can be involved with our institutions, especially, is cult-like.
Yeah. And it really is. The other thing that like I said, they create an enemy within. They uses us versus them. Look, guys, I'm saving you from the evil capitalists of the world.
Yeah.
You're only safe if you're with me, and we got to keep running from them because they're everywhere. Um, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of a lot of them were the members were using drugs. Jim Jones was definitely using drugs.
Mhm.
He starts to become more erratic as it goes, as he gets into all this drugs. And you got to think, where's he getting the drugs from? Where did he get all the cyanide? Where did he get all this stuff from? He's
Yeah.
got all this stuff, and all the while he's scoping out Guyana and places like that, with the idea to leave the United States and have a colony for his members. How do you get a colony in Guyana? Like, where do you get those resources? I know he was taking money from, excuse me, from his members, but this is pretty hefty.
Yeah. Right.
Um, this is like, how does he know to do all this? Maybe he's just a savvy business kind of guy. He knows
Yeah.
connections. I don't know, but I think it's probably when he starts doing these white knight things, and then he's got all the drugs. He wants to get members to leave so that he doesn't control them, but that also presents a problem because the members that leave start talking.
Mm.
And of course, he threatens them all. He threatens their lives. He's threatened people and their children. If you go into it more specifically, you'll see there's people who talk about how he's threatened. But the mainstream media always presented Jim Jones in a more positive light, or they didn't really talk about it at all. They didn't cover what was really going on. It was the independent journalists, like the street journalists who,
Mm.
were running their own stuff and printing their own, magazines. There was no internet then, of course, and you couldn't just have your own radio or TV. That was way really expensive. No one just had that. All they could do was write articles for small little independent news productions, and they did that. And some of these people were talking and telling them what was going on. And there was a journal or a newspaper called New West, and they started to expose the People's Temple, and they were interviewing ex-members and telling what was going on. And Jim Jones was informed that this article was going to come out. And I think he phoned them. I think he tried to stop it. He tried to kind of imply, like I think he tried to use a conspiracy theorist to imply there was conspiracies against them.
Mm.
Him going on, like, now present himself as the victim, which is, you watch any of these kind of narcissists today, like Andrew Tate or stuff, they'll do all these things and they'll lie about it, and then suddenly they're the victim when people start talking about it. They'll always kind of take up this power thing where they're trying to get all this power, and then when things go sour, they're the victim.
Yeah.
Everyone's against them. Poor me, whereas the list of victims they victimize is, long.
Mm.
And so the guy's paranoid, he's on drugs. He obviously already has this land in Guyana. what I found so suspicious about his behavior was that within 6 hours, he literally had his members all packed up to go and left the United States within 24 hours, but like over 900 members, and shuttled off to Guyana. That's some impressive coordination
Yeah.
to do in a very short period of time. And I'm thinking, what connections do you have to make that happen?
Well, I mean, after years of amassing wealth from all these poor people that he manipulated, gaining all these connections, and like you said, the big question is, how do you get those connections to begin with? That just doesn't come to anybody. So, very big question surrounding that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even at the CIA.gov, there's a PDF. They'll probably deny it, but there's a PDF here. It says Reverend Jones was a CIA agent. This was from 1981 in the Los Angeles Times. San Francisco, survivors of the People Temple's tragedy and relatives of dead followers of the Reverend Jim Jones sued the federal government Wednesday, claiming it conspired in the deaths of more than 900 cult members. The suit for personal injury in violation of civil rights charges that former Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and former CIA Director Stanfield Turner participated in a conspiracy with Jones to control Temple members who held socialist beliefs. The suit alleges that Jones was an employee, servant, an agent, or operative of the CIA from 1963 until his death, along with 912 other Temple members in a mass suicide murder. It's murder in
Mm-hmm.
Guyana. And of course, Representative Leo Ryan was murdered amongst other news crew. They were visiting there. The suit charges that the CIA knew that they had commissioned the James Warren Jones to embark on a plan to control and ultimately massacre members of the People's Temple.
Mm-hmm.
Monica Bagby Thomas, Rogue, and Tina M. Turner, wounded in November 18th, 1978 attack, are joined by relatives of several cult members. So there's a lawsuit about this, claiming, it's not just it's not just me making up some conspiracy. At the time, 3 years after this massacre, they were being sued. The government was being sued because it was strongly believed that he was tied in with the CIA right from 1963. That's near the time where he was wanting to move to San Francisco.
Mm. It
It's
wouldn't
so
surprise
creepy.
me at all if he was being used for some kind of black operation or
Mm-hmm.
experiment to see just how many people they could get at the same time to commit a mass suicide. It really wouldn't surprise me at all because we've heard about sick experimentation from these three-letter agencies and CIA since the beginning of these institutions. So it really wouldn't surprise me at all if something that malevolent was behind all this.
Yeah. And it was, and it was the relatives who were issuing, they would issue packets to press and Congress. And those relatives are what got Leo Ryan involved, who wanted to go out and investigate this down in Guyana. And that's where, you get the whole Jonestown massacre. And Jim Jones had people were visiting him, news agencies were visiting him, and he would set it all up to make everything look good. Look, we have bananas, look, we have this. And it was
Mm,
it was a shit show, a
right,
disaster. And he, of course, had armed guards there. No one could leave. They were
mm,
ultimately utterly controlled.
right.
And
Well, let's go over the final events of that tragic day and everything that kind of unfolded that led to it.
Yeah. So, well, what happened was the I said, look, Leo Ryan had been informed because the relatives were distributing information about what was going on. So he, along with Congresswoman Jackie Spear, NBC camera crew reporters, headed out to Guyana. They were just collecting data to see if the relatives were telling the truth.
Mm,
So they landed in Georgetown on November 5th. Then they flew out to the Port Kaituma airstrip. And Jones had been made aware that they were coming long before, so he was prepared for them. He was ready, and so he had everyone put on a good show. He organized how great everything was to try and trick. But when the congressman arrived and everyone was looking cheerful, but they could tell something wasn't right. They could tell it was fake. I mean, if you've got some instinct that something's going wrong. And eventually people were started to slip, the congresswoman and Leo Ryan, they start to slip them letters like help us. Like they knew that they figured this is our only way to get out of here. And so I think Leo Ryan was attacked by somebody that night. They were doing some kind of performance for them, and he was actually stabbed. A
Hmm.
guy named Don Sly.
Hmm.
And so people started to say, we want to leave, we want to leave, we want to go. And Jim Jones didn't protest in front of Ryan, and they left with some people. And Jim Jones had this thing called the Red Brigade. He called them, it's his dudes with machine guns, basically,
Hmm.
his little thugs. And so he had them go down to Port Kaituna, and that's where all hell breaks loose. And they gunned down Leo Ryan. They killed the NBC news crew. Congresswoman Jackie Spear is the only one I think who survived. And she laid down and played dead.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Crazy.
It was absolutely crazy. She had 5 bullets shot into her, and as you know, I, there's you can find like clips. Jim Jones recorded everything on audio
Hmm.
in the last 45 minutes, and it's pretty horrible
Yeah.
because as soon as that happened, he was like, okay, it's time to go. And not everybody drank Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
A lot of people were injected, forcefully shot. What he did was he made a lot of the adults inject, make their children drink the cyanide, and then once
Yeah.
their children died, they wanted to die.
Wow.
So they had to listen to their babies die. It's pretty. 260 of the 900 were children.
Wow. That's
And so, yeah, and then I think Jones shot himself, and the other members he shot everybody, and everybody was just gone.
hmm.
And by the time anyone got there, some people had still escaped, like
Hmm.
literally through the jungle, escaped and managed to leave and report what happened. And
Right.
so by the time anyone got there, it was just a massive pile of bodies out in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah. And I'm sure
Brutal.
anyone can find those pictures online if they have the stomach for it, but it's pretty horrible.
Yeah, and I've listened to the recordings. And it's
Hmm.
not an easy thing to listen to, so be warned. It's this crazed, drugged up MKUltra nut job preaching on while people are being screaming and crying and being murdered. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like worse than a horror movie.
Right. Now, you have a few talking points at the end of your little presentation, possibilities, speculations of what was really going
Mm-hmm.
on. We covered some of those as you went, the possible CIA ties. Was he some sort of CIA asset? Was this some sort of grand experiment? Who knows? But the question I have is, do you think he originally intended to kill himself, or did he want to really escape the whole thing?
Well, I think it's sort of like any kind of crazed lunatic. He's obviously always for himself.
Mhm.
He probably, maybe he had plans because there's people said he had planned to flee to Russia or Cuba. But when you're dealing with this sort of narcissistic fake persona and it starts to break down and you see the real monster, you see what's really beneath, and they can't contain that psychotic persona. Oftentimes they will become suicidal. They'll just
Yeah.
they'd rather be dead than be in custody. They'd rather be in dead than have anyone else have control over them.
Well, it's also speculated that a lot of these MK Ultra victims have this self-destruct
Mm-hmm.
mechanism or
Yeah.
trigger whenever things get out of hand, that they're just programmed to off themselves.
Right. So then they're gone, and no one else can interrogate them and find
Mhm.
out, what they were really involved in. Very
Yeah.
true.
Right.
Very true. And it's kind of there's also the idea that it was a psyop.
Hmm.
Jim Jones was a psyop, and it was part of him ruining, prosperity of Black Americans
Mm.
and ruining the civil rights movement. I mean, we've seen this with like what's his name? He was to ruin the hippie movement, Manson.
Yeah.
People
Well,
feel
these
like he was to
operations,
ruin the anti-war movement.
you find out that they're multi-layered. There's many purposes to it. It could have been all of these things that we're mentioning
Hmm.
just to serve different purposes for one big operation.
Exactly. And I don't know when he met with them, but it's obvious from 1963 on he's in with something beyond his own church
Yeah.
and his own means.
Man, this is
And
so interesting.
today people worship him. It's really
Mm,
disturbing.
unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, well, people worshiping that, these women that worship. I found a group. This I don't even think the group exists anymore. I found it years ago, and I was doing screenshots from it. But they do. They were doing things like Jim Jones Fashion Day.
Oh,
Oh, look,
shit.
they would post pictures. Look at Jim Jones on this day in this suit and this, or they would dress up like him, or they would make weird concoctions and crafts about him, or they would make like a brew. Like one person did a Holy Trinity art project, and one bottle, like they're like these jeweled bottles, and one
Oh,
has
God.
his Jim's is representative Jim's urine and decomposition fluid, and one jar has got fat and child. Like it's very occulty. It's like they're trying to make occult rituals and say it's Jim's whatever.
Oh,
And these people, they write poetry about him, and it's like these sick, borderline crazy women who
mm.
are idolizing me. It's like those chicks who try to marry serial killers while they're in prison. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's super weird. This is so crazy. Melissa, thank you so much. This was great information. I learned so much. Looking forward to the next time. We always have fascinating discussions. Before we close out today, remind everyone where they can find all your content.
Well, I've got shows on Jim Jones. So if you go to whether genxonx.com and any of those links there and sift through the library of stuff, there is stuff where we do some stuff on Jim Jones. So you can find it there. But there's also lots of political stuff, spiritual stuff. Chris is going to be coming on my show. It's going to be pretty cool at the end of the month. So
Yep.
he'll be there. So Joe, you can join us. I think it's the 30th of January. We're live streaming at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you can join us
Sweet.
for that. And there's lots of stuff on politics, on conspiracy theories, talking about daily stuff. I also want to do some more things about getting guests on to actually show what extremists on the left are, doing, and where this sort of dismantling of society comes from and how they think. And just because they're still around, they don't go anywhere. They stay around. They're all over the place. So everybody thinks they're gone, but they're not.
Yeah.
So I just kind of, who knows where it will go. But if you go to genxonx.com, you will find all the links to subscribe and support the show. And I would really appreciate it.
Awesome. Melissa, thank you so much. Looking forward to coming on your show in a bit. And we'll definitely do this again. Until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See you then. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV, which is available on Fire Stick, Roku, iOS, and Android. Hello, friends. If you or a loved one is struggling with a digestive problem, if you often feel bloated or gassy, experience constipation or loose stools more often than you'd like, maybe you get heartburn and discomfort or pain after meals. If any of these gastrointestinal issues are reducing the quality of your life, get in touch with my friend Christian Yordanov. He's a functional health practitioner and author of 2 health books. He has successfully helped clients with truly severe gut problems. Now, we're talking about people who dreaded the thought of their next meal because of all the gas, bloating, distension, and pain they would experience. Many of his clients have had severe gut problems for multiple years, sometimes more than a decade, having received no assistance from the conventional system. Christian uses state-of-the-art lab tests to zero in on your specific imbalances. He designs customized gut restoration and health optimization protocols for each of his clients. He works with clients all around the world and assists them every step of the way with chat support and regular video sessions. He'll help you dial in your diet, cleanse your gut, optimize your meat suit, and show you exactly what you need to do to restore your health and digestive function. So if you're tired of suffering needlessly and want to resolve your gut problems once and for all, click that link in the description to visit Christian's website, book a free intro call with him to discuss your situation, and make sure to mention FKN at the time of booking. He's going to add extra consultation sessions to your package. So book that call and fix your gut.